It was spring harvest in 1982, and Tony Campolo stood on the stage and in his inimitable way challenged the crowd there. While you were sleeping last night, 45,000 kids died of starvation and malnutrition. And what's worse, you don't give a shit. A gasp went up from the congregation, and he continued, and what's worse is that you are far more concerned about the fact that I just said shit than about the 45,000 kids that died last night. That is what is wrong with our Christianity. We've taken our Christian faith, which calls us to be passionate among the poor and the oppressed, and to sacrifice everything that we have to heal the sufferings of others. And we've twisted it into a morality that makes sure people don't use four-letter words. This story has been told to me more times than I can remember, often with the storytellers missing the point about the anger and Tony's passion to see Christians return to their identity and calling in Christ. In our reading today, Paul uses some very strong language too, so much so that questions still spin around the Greek word skubalon, which Paul uses to describe a level of filth and disregard that could be easily as strong as Tony Campolo's choice of language. There's no getting away from it. Paul was, at times, very direct in his speech. In his other letter to the church in Galatia, he tells the men, those that are arguing over their rites and rituals, that if they think the practice of circumcision gives them a status above other believers, then they might as well go pro and cut the whole thing off. Ouch. Why is it, or what is it, that gets Paul so riled up that he feels the need to use this kind of speech? We probably need to rewind a little bit. Way back in the beginning of the story, God invites a man called Abram to form a new kind of tribe. This tribe, God says, will be his way of showing the world love. But how do you grow a tribe? Well, rather obviously, by having lots and lots of babies. The ancient world, however, well, they were a little short on microscopes and labs and testing kits. They simply observed the world around them, how things worked. The birds and the bees. I think you can see where I'm going with that. At least I hope you can. Anyway, because of all of this, it seems, circumcision became this particular tribe's demonstration of commitment to both growing and populating the tribe. It was the initiation rite of this people group. Now, over time, this painful initiation and demonstration of commitment would become something of a sign for this tribe. They were able to divide the world into those in the tribe and those out of the tribe. Circumcision was, at the very least, a sign of tribal identity. And so now we fast forward to Paul, who years and years later, as a member of this part of the tribe, is travelling around telling people about Jesus. The problem is that there is a group of his people, this tribe, that are right behind him, turning up wherever he has been, telling people that if you're male and you want to be in the Jesus Club, then you better get yourself circumcised. It's part of the deal, they'd say. It's been that way since the beginning. Are you in or are you out? Imagine, for those outside of the tribe who have been impacted by the message of Jesus, Romans and Greeks who now felt part of this new family of God. I wonder how they would have reacted. How would you react? We've got to do what? Now, this might explain some of the anger that Paul feels. It might also explain some of his language in this letter to the Philippians. The anger and frustration that surfaces with Paul is when identity and status as followers of Jesus and as children of God is suddenly trumped by anything else. When we draw dividing lines of in or out, Whenever we prioritize the things that give us some gain or standing with people and make them, those external elements, the be-all and end-all, then we have a moment of mistaken identity. Paul's boast, he says, is in Jesus. He says, listen, if you want to make this whole thing about status and position, in or out, I've more grounds than most to boast and to claim to be part of the in crowd, because I was circumcised on the 8th day. I was from the family of Benjamin. I was a Hebrew of Hebrews. I kept the law. I was a Pharisee. I was so passionate about painting these lines of tribal distinction and division that I even persecuted the church. By those standards of righteousness that are based on the law, I was faultless. But, Paul says, these are not things that are at the centre. They're not the centre point any longer. Whatever gain they did give me, by now, and in comparison of who I am because of Jesus, those things are a pile of scubalon. Paul is now concerned with emulating Jesus, the one who, being in very nature God, came as a servant. Paul decides to give up his past status and privilege, those old boundary markers. He's given it all to become a servant like Jesus and to participate in his suffering and in his sacrificial love. And it's all done in the hope and trust that God will carry him through death even, into resurrection, just as it did for Jesus. When we exchange our identity in Christ and opt for surface level distinctions, skin deep stuff, we can end up twisting our faith into a thin type of morality that Tony challenged. Perhaps the anger and the language that Tony and St. Paul use is entirely appropriate language when we consider what such an approach is subtly saying, that Jesus is not enough. When we exchange our calling to follow Jesus in caring for the poor and for the oppressed, the result is creating some superficial dividing lines on the basis of outward religious behaviour and conduct rather than the sacrificial life of Christ. The message of Jesus is all about internal change that produces and flows out into behaviour transformation. That our identity as part of God's people is not an appearance of simply a matter of appearance. It's not skin deep. It's far more than that. That is no longer what establishes in or out. It's who you know that matters. And thank goodness that is Jesus.